Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar people in the room. I'm going to get started. It's 10 o'clock. Hey, everybody. We're going to be together. I've got about 30 minutes of some slides to share with you, some discussion about the best wildflower hikes in Kane County. So I'm going to share with you some great hiking areas that we can go, and also touch on what's really the highlight of hiking in the spring, a lot of our nice spring ephemeral wildflowers. So I'm Barb McKittrick, and I'm the Environmental Education Manager with the Forest Preserve of Kane County. And this is one of the first of our series of Nature Virtually Everywhere programs. We really prefer to be outside with you all, but in the times that we haven't been able to, we put together a slate of virtual programs to, hopefully get you invigorated to go outside. Even when we're practicing social distancing, we still have the forest preserves, and the Kane County preserves have never shut during this time. So it's a great opportunity to still get out there, and it is still spring, although we're getting to the tail end of it. So while we're together, I've got all of you muted just because I'm recording this session so that people who can't make it live can look at it later. So for privacy's sake, I have muted you all, and you won't be able to unmute yourself, but you can still communicate with me in the chat window. And if you have trouble opening that up, you hover your cursor at the bottom of your screen, you'll see a chat box. If you click on that, you can see there's already a couple comments in the chat window. I don't have the ability in this meeting set up, the level of program that we have, to turn off your videos. But again, for privacy's sake, since we are recording, if you'd like to turn your video off on your end, I'd suggest that you do that. I'll still know that you're here. I can see your name in the participant window. I think that's about it. If you've got questions, it's great. I'd love this to be as interactive as possible. That's how our live programs are, so I'll try to mirror that as much as we can. But while I switch to sharing my screen, it'll be difficult for me to keep up with all the questions. So I'll get to those at the end after going through the slide deck. I'll keep glancing at it occasionally if you're having any difficulties. Right now, before we get into actually looking at the slides, everyone okay from a technical standpoint? I can't say that I'm an IT expert, but I can help you if you're having any trouble either seeing or hearing what's on the screen. Everybody good? Okay. Thanks. All right, well, good. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and we'll talk about hiking in Kane County. All right, so we put together this slate of programs, like I said, called Nature Virtually Everywhere. And this is first webinar, but we have had several Facebook Live events and some videos. Did a great Blanding's turtle release with our wildlife biologist and turned that into a nice video over the weekend. So we'll keep on doing these virtual programs. Some people, might actually prefer to do these occasionally, even when we can get outside in larger groups. But we are eager to get outside is the bottom line. And since this is the first day of the Illinois stay-at-home order moving to phase 3, we can do that. And we will be, as of June 1st, opening the Kane County Forest Preserve programming back up. The preserves have never closed. You can always get out and hike, and I hope you have been doing. But we're going to actually have programs available starting on Monday with groups of 10 or less. So hopefully see you all live sometime real soon. So spring started this year on March 19th. That was the spring equinox. And right about that same time, we had another event happen. We all started staying home, and that's about when the Illinois stay-at-home order began. But I think as a result of this, and maybe one of the silver linings is that our forest preserves have never been more crowded and appreciated. And it's kind of all that a lot of us had left, was getting out and hiking in our natural areas. I think people realize that there are emotional and physical benefits to getting out. Maybe you don't know where some of the best spots to hike are. Maybe you don't realize how many green areas and wild areas and forest preserves and parks that we all have within a pretty short drive of our house. So I'd like to be able to share that with you and then give you some tips then on the spring wildflowers, because that is such a highlight when we're out there hiking in the springtime. So without further ado, let's get into some of the specifics. So I mentioned that we all are, I mean, we're really lucky here in Kane County especially, and even in some of the surrounding counties, that we have a lot of green area, a lot of green space very close to us. We don't have to drive for hours. Although we sometimes think about, you know, when we're hiking, you know, I've been lucky to travel a lot and hike on the Appalachian Trail and a lot of national parks, but we have a lot of really great places right here in our own backyard. There's a really great website called the Trust for Public Land that you can go to. The URL's on the top left there. And they're an agency that's devoted to advocating and getting grant monies available for different agencies to restore and preserve available green space. And their goal is to have every resident in the United States be within 10-minute walk of a park or a forest preserve or someplace that they can hike. And I'm happy to say for us, you can go and plug in your own suburb in there. The city of Chicago itself is doing better than the national average. The national average is just over 50% of folks live within a 10-minute walk of a green space. The city of Chicago itself is 98%. It's ranked 10th of the 100 biggest cities in the United States. We've got a lot of green space in this area. And most of the surrounding suburbs are about the same. I plugged in Aurora, just an example here, and 85% of Aurora residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park. So I encourage you to go to this website and check it out yourself. I'm going to be focusing on the Kane County Forest Preserves today, but there's a lot of other green space out there too around you that you can hike in and enjoy. See a lot of spring ephemerals. I hike in all year long. Yeah, check it out. It's a really great resource. It talks about you know, all of these opportunities for hiking. We all have a park district near us. I happen to live in Batavia in the Fox Valley. There's some great park districts that have properties available for hiking. Some of them are very large, and just a couple here at the Fox Valley, the St. Charles. Pretty much any one of the suburbs and you know, sort of collar cities has a park district. And then, you know, I work for the Kane County Forest Preserve, so my particular favorite, but you're probably all within a very short drive of a number of different county forest preserves or conservation agencies too. And there's some great places to hike there as well. We are lucky to have a really great intersecting group of bike trails, and they're listed in this map. You can go online and get yourself a copy of this, but these are multi-use trails, so you can hike on them as well. We are going to be opening up on June 1st in Kane County, including our nature center, and we have copies of that map. Stop on and pick one up. You can also get them at a lot of other county facilities. We even have 2 state parks. Most of us are within a half-hour's drive of these 2. Silver Springs is in Yorkville, and the bottom picture is James Pate Phillips State Park. That's in Bartlett. And both of those parks are opening up again today, as the state of Illinois is finally you know, starting to open things up. Those are going to be available for you for hiking as well. And finally, I know we even have a couple people on the call today that work at Fermilab that I used to work at. There is a wonderful network of trail systems there through the prairie and the woodlands. The last I looked this morning, Fermilab is still not open to the public, but keep your eye on it because I'm sure it will be shortly. And I'm just quickly look at chat. Okay. So what I'm going to focus on the rest of the time, though, are, you know, what can we see in the Kane County Forest Preserves? What are our best spring hikes there? And what are we going to see in terms of wildflowers at this time of year? So we've got, in the Kane County Forest Preserve, we have trails for pretty much every age and ability. From seniors, this is a group that we take out once a month. The naturalists go out with a group of seniors. We call it our senior stroll. They hike about a mile, but you can get out there on your own. You don't have to be with a naturalist, obviously, to go for a hike and enjoy things. So Some of the trails are perfectly flat, like this one that I believe was at Pingree Grove. Some of them are hilly, and then there's more adventurous trails for children. So our trails vary from a 1/4 mile to 10 miles. Some are paved, some are asphalted for mobility impaired folks, and a lot of them are mowed or are more like paths, like this one here. This particular picture is near and dear to my heart because that little towhead on the left is my son at a Forest Preserve program hike about 18 years ago. So when you're out there hiking in the spring, the real beauty is when you're getting out, you're getting exercise. There's been a lot of studies lately that show time out in nature is good for you mentally and emotionally as well. It decreases stress levels. It decreases anxiety. It's good for your cognitive abilities. Just a lot of benefits of being out in nature. But what we really get to enjoy in the spring are ephemeral wildflowers. You can see a beautiful field here of wild geranium, the lovely purple flowering plant that covers a lot of our woodlands right about now. It's blooming now. Ephemeral means short-lived. These are flowers that are typically in a woodland, and they need to start growing quickly before the trees leaf out and shade out the understory. So the plants begin blooming. The first spring wildflower in Kane County starts blooming sometimes even at the end of February. We'll talk about which one that is when there's still snow on the ground. And they continue blooming all the way through about mid-June. So we're not done yet. We're getting to the tail end of the spring wildflower season. There's still plenty of them out there for you to enjoy. This has been a really great year. It had been relatively cool and rainy up until now, and so the wildflowers did begin in late February, early March, but a lot of them are still in bloom. So let's get into it. I'd like to share with you a couple of specific ones. 15, there's so many wildflowers now, and then as it gets later into the season, the prairie starts to bloom. But I just chose 15 fairly common wildflowers to give you a bit of history on, talk to you about where you'll find them, and share a little interesting tidbit about each one of them. And when we get to the Q&A, if you all have things to add, there's a lot of stories and interesting Native American uses of these plants. We go on, we could talk about each one of these wildflowers for an hour, but we only have 30 minutes total here today. So the wildflowers tend to progress through the season, with some of them, as I mentioned, starting as early as late February. And the one that we see first, typically here in Kane County, is this guy. This is the skunk cabbage. And it's a very unusual shaped flower. And the flowering structure, that little hood, that red curved part that you see is called the spathe. And the spathe covers the flowering structure. It pops up often when there's snow on the ground, and it has the ability to produce its own heat and actually melt the snow around it. So that's a pretty interesting feature. Not too many plants have that ability. So that's why it's able to pop up. Now it's called skunk cabbage because it has an unpleasant smell to us, but it's very enticing to the pollinators that enjoy this plant. The carrion beetles and flies are really attracted to that smell of rotting meat that the flower produces. Once the flower blooms, and it already has, it's well past blooming, the leaves are gigantic. And that's what you'll see now as you're hiking. And this plant prefers a real mesic or wet woodland. So that's where you're going to find the flower earlier in the year. And now you'll see the gigantic leaves. Another one that's really early in the spring, Spring Beauty. Very delicate, white flower with pink stripes on it, a 5-petaled flower. The leaves are very slender. They look like grass leaves. Spring Beauty has a very interesting seed dispersal mechanism. So the seeds on the Spring Beauty, and this one has pretty much past its bloom time now, But when it was blooming, the seeds have a structure, a protein pack on them called an elaiosome, and that protein is really attractive to ants as a food source. And so the ants take the seed back to their colony, drag it down into the soil, eat the elaiosome, that protein packet, but they're not interested in the seed. They just discard the seed, and the seed is left to grow. It's already been planted by the ants. So it's pretty unique, pretty smart. Plants don't have brains, but they do some things pretty smartly. Most people know this one, the Virginia bluebell. One of our earlier flowers, again in mesic or wet woodlands, often forms real large colonies. The seeds just are very prolific, spread quickly, kind of spreads a carpet of blue early in the spring season. This is an interesting one. This is sharp-lobed hepatica. Some people call it liverwort. So all these plants have multiple common names, and sometimes the common names depend on where you are geographically. So, one man's red trillium is another's prairie trillium, is another's wake robin. There's just multiple names. So using the scientific name, which I'm not doing today because this is a family program and most people use common names, is always the best to be really specific. But back to our common name, sharp-lobed hepatica. Hepatic refers to of the liver, the organ, the liver. And the human liver is lobed. It has 4 lobes. This leaf, it has 3 lobes, but it's close enough that people, said it was a lobe, said it looked like a liver, and so called the plant hepatica. There's an interesting theory that developed as far back as the Roman Empire called the doctrine of signatures that predicted that a plant that looked like an organ could be used medicinally to treat that organ. So hepatica, folks thought that it looked like a liver, so therefore it would be an effective treatment for liver ailments. Well, I don't think that worked very well because the plant is actually toxic to humans, but it's an interesting theory, the doctrine of signatures. And next, this is the one where we saw that mass of purple underneath the savanna-like areas. Is a wild geranium, which is blooming right now. Wild geranium is also called cranesbill. That's because the seeds, when it gets to the point that it's setting seed, are in a structure that looks like the bill of a crane. And they have a very interesting way of seed dispersal too. When the bill of the crane dries, the pressure builds up in there to the point that it explodes, and the seeds fly out, they explode out and disperse away from the parent plant that way. So a beautiful, beautiful plant in our woodlands right now that you can enjoy. But there's more spring wildflowers. I'm gonna see if I can put the chat on. I'm gonna have a little interaction and see if we can. No, I can't. I'll have to wait till the end. Well, you can just in your head see if you can figure out what some of these are as we're going along. So here we have bloodroot. And bloodroot is another early flowering spring wildflower, and it's pretty much gone by now. The flower is very delicate. So when it first starts to bloom, those leaves that you see, those basal leaves, wrap tightly around the flower, almost like a set of praying hands, and protect that bud. When the bud opens, the leaves will finally open as well. The plant got its name because the sap, if you were to break the stem or the leaf, especially the root, it oozes a blood red sap. It was used by Native Americans to dye fabric. So it's really, really distinct if you were to tear off any portion of the plant. One of my favorite, I have this in my own garden, it has already passed bloom too, but look for it next year, is I think I like it just because of the evocative name. It's called Dutchman's Breeches. It's got that beautiful silvery gray foliage, very toothed and fern-like in appearance. And the flower is unique. The flower got its name, Dutchman's Breeches, because it looks like a little pair of pantaloons hanging on a wash line. And it really does, it's lovely. There's another plant in the same genus, Dicentra, called squirrel corn that's not as common. It looks almost the same, the foliage looks nearly identical, but the flower is a little bit more heart-shaped. And some of you might have bleeding heart in your yard. That's a member of the same genus as well. The leaves look different, but you can see that the flower structure is kind of similar on a bleeding heart as this Dutchman's Breeches. Next. Yes, an interesting ground cover for a shady woodland garden. This is wild ginger. So you can see that the leaves are heart-shaped, and there's 2 heart-shaped leaves to a plant, and the flower, it may be hard for you to realize that that is the flower right in the center of that picture, that red structure low down on the ground. So each of the plants gets 1 flower down there. And this is another flower that's pollinated by flies and beetles because it's way down there low. It doesn't have a bad smell, not like skunk cabbage that's also pollinated by beetles and flies. It actually smells a little bit like the tropical ginger that we use for cooking, although they're not related. This plant spreads by rhizomes, which are vegetative shoots, clonal. And so we often see great big colonies of it in our woodlands. And this is blooming now. These leaves stay all summer long. So again, just a beautiful ground cover all spring and all summer. You'll be seeing that one out there right now. Next, the carpets of this flower, they can really withstand deep shade. This is false rue anemone. We have several anemones here. We have woodland anemone, rue anemone, meadow rue, but this particular one, it's really the leaves that make it distinctive and make the identification of false rue anemone. They're kind of lacy, and the white 5-petaled flower there. So it's it often does form large colonies as well in a very shaded, any type of soil, woodland. And lastly, see if you can guess this one. A lot of people know it. It's shooting star. And it looks like a shooting star. It looks like a firework shooting. It's got some interesting features as well. It's pollinated. One of the main pollinators of the shooting star are bumblebees, because of that unique formation of the flower. They can get in there and get the pollen, but they don't pollinate in a normal way as a lot of bees. They use a mechanism to pollinate a spring beauty called buzz pollination, which is where the bee lands on the flower and its thoracic muscles vibrate really rapidly, and that vibration causes the pollen to come loose on the stamens and then adhere to the bee that way. So you can even Google that. It's really fun to watch. Just Google buzz pollination and you can see this explosion of pollen coming off the flower as the bee's thoracic muscles are vibrating. I think we have a few more. Last slide of 5. Again, we could talk about each one of these for so long and there are so many. I chose 15. This is cutleaf toothwort. Another early blooming spring wildflower. The foliage is still around, but most of the flowers at this point have passed their prime. It's kind of another doctrine of signature type of plant. So cutleaf toothwort, there's a couple of stories about how it got that toothwort name. The leaves, as you can see, are deeply lobed or toothed. They're really cut deeply. So that's one. The root of the plant is shaped like a tooth. And lastly, the Native Americans used the root as a poultice for toothache. Again, maybe relating to the fact, kind of like that doctrine of signatures, that the plant looked like a tooth in many respects. Therefore, it had to be a good treatment for toothache. Next, this one is blooming right now. Several of you might have this in your garden. It's a very popular one. There are ornamental varieties as well. This is woodland phlox. Kind of similar to a non-native we have, which is Dame's Rocket. Dame's Rocket has 4 petals, phlox has 5. You can see that the deep center of that flower, that's where the pollen is. So this plant is pollinated only by insects that have really long tongues, including butterflies. Oh, most people know this one, May apple. A lot of interesting stories behind May apple. So it looks very unique. When we take the kids out, they, in groups in the forest preserves, they often say it looks like an umbrella or a palm tree, and it does. But the way it got its name, May apple, is that each plant will have either 1 or 2 leaves. You can see in the foreground of this picture a plant with 2 leaves coming off of that main stem. The plants with 1 leaf are sterile. They don't produce a flower or a fruit. Plants with 2 leaves, like the one in the picture in the front, do produce a flower right about now. So these are flowering now in May, and then the flower will mature if pollinated into a fruit that looks a little bit like a small, very small apple, more like the size of a large cherry, that forms at the junction of those 2 leaves. And you can see one forming here on this plant in the front. It really should be called Mayflower, not May apple, because the flower appears now, but the apple doesn't really, get large enough to see until later in the summer, and it's not fully ripe until towards the end of the summer. Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of folks ask, can you eat that apple, especially when we're out with them? The answer is maybe. So most of a May apple plant is toxic to humans, including the apple when it's, or the fruit, when it's not ripe. When it's fully ripe, it can be eaten. It loses its toxicity. And Native Americans and early pioneers typically made a jelly out of that ripe fruit, but you've got to get it so correct between unripe and ripe that I've never tried it. But many people have. Next, trout lily. Again, masses of these plants, carpeting, deep shady woodland early in the spring. A little late for these now. We have both the white that you see here and yellow in Kane County. Got its name because if you look at that leaf, it looks like it's speckled and spotted. I know, like those of you who are fisher people, when you see a trout in the water, kind of turning in the sun, it's got that same type of a speckly pattern. And then lastly, the last one that we'll share, I bet a lot of you know this one. Very unusual. We're often asked, is it a carnivorous plant? It's not, although sometimes insects that don't fly do get stuck down in that tubular structure. This is Jack in the Pulpit. And so named because it looks kind of like a preacher standing in his pulpit. So this is another flowering structure that has that space. That's what the hood is. And then the jack, or the preacher in the pulpit, is that vertical spike right in the middle underneath the space, and it's called the spadix. And the actual flower is down towards the bottom of the spadix within that cup structure. So pollinators do need to get down in there and then pop back out again. So a very unique spring wildflower. There's another related in the same genus flower called the green dragon. That's really unusual and rare. Jack in the Pulpit is not as rare, and this one is blooming now. So as you're out hiking, you're going to see it. So you may have many others that you enjoy. There are certainly dozens more. And in a high quality woodland, you're gonna see, you can see up to 10, 15 of these flowers in the same area. And I'd like to talk with you now about which preserves are the best for seeing these flowers. We have so many forest preserves, but before I do want to share with you what I feel is My particular least favorite spring wildflower. Maybe some of you have those that you don't like. Mine, oops, lost track of my controls there. Mine is poison ivy. So believe it or not, poison ivy is a native flowering plant. In the spring, it gets panicles of greenish yellow flowers. And then by the fall, those flowers turn into a whitish, well, it looks a little green here, berry. And those berries are actually a favorite food of woodpeckers and flickers. So poison ivy has a use, believe it or not. It's not just put on earth to irritate us hikers. Strangely enough, the oil in poison ivy that makes us we have immune reaction to. The only species that react to that are primates and hamsters. So if you're not one of those, you don't have to worry about poison ivy. It's urushiol, which is the oil in poison ivy that causes the reaction. Poison ivy can be in one of three forms. It can be a low ground cover, it can be a bush, or it can be a vine, like this picture in the background is showing. But in whatever structure it's in, the leaves are similar. They're in groups of 3, arranged alternately along the stem. And the last, or the distal leaf, has a long petiole, and the 2 side leaves are attached pretty much directly to the stem. And oftentimes the 2 side leaves, like the one at the very bottom, you can see are shaped like a mitten. So it differs from a couple of our other vines, like Virginia creeper, which has leaflets of 5, and box elder seedlings often look like poison ivy. They have leaflets of 3, 2, but they are arranged oppositely because it's a maple, member of the maple family. So their leaves are opposite along the stem, whereas poison ivy is alternate. So a couple little clues for you as you're seeing that least favorite wildflower. Now let's talk about where we can find all these great flowering plants. So you've got a wide variety to choose from. As of this year, the Forest Preserve District of Kane County has over 100 forest preserves, and nearly 70 of them are open to the public with different kinds of amenities, from parking lots to water fountains, restrooms. Not all of them have them, but you can go to our website and you can see which ones have the amenity that you're most interested in. But most of them will have trails through them, again, of different lengths and different habitats. So I'm going to showcase now my favorite 7. It's hard to pick, to narrow it down, but if we want to see a great selection of ephemeral wildflowers, we want habitat that includes woodlands, because that's where most of these are going to be found, and that has a decent trail system. Some of the ones I feature will be shorter and some will be longer. So let's quickly get into it. You can see the county is large, right? It's a long, narrow county. From in the north is Huntley, all the way to the south is Aurora, to the west, Maple Park, and then way up at the northeast is Carpentersville. So it covers a lot of area with the Fox River running through it. So I'm going to start at the far northern end of the county and work my way down and point out the 7 that I think are, if I'd recommend that you get out there in the next couple of weeks before spring is over to see these ephemerals, this is where I'd recommend you going. So this is a Freeman K. Maher way up in Gilbert's. It's our 2nd largest forest preserve. It's been added onto over the years. 2 sections. The farther south section is the Camp Comotichi. It's a Boy Scout camp. It's got a youth campground there and a model airplane field. And then the other section on the northern section is across Freeman Road. So it has quite a few trails. Almost 6 miles worth of trails, and 3 of them are accessible. And by accessible, I mean either paved or asphalt or limestone screening, so that they are accessible to walkers, the asphalt to wheelchairs. So Freeman Kane's got some great geological features. Freeman Kane is a result of glaciation. as are a lot of our areas around here, but this one especially so. You can see the roll to the land there at Freeman Kane. It's a challenging hike, it can be, because there is some up and down and some elevation change, but also you're rewarded with some really great views when you're hiking at Freeman Kane. So it includes prairie as well as woodland. This portion is more prairie-ish. And because glaciation created these features, a couple of different features, when the glaciers moved through here 12,000 years ago, they left deposits of gravel in different forms. Some were hills, and that's what a cane is. It's a hill of gravel dropped by the glacier. Some are winding ridges of gravel called eskers, and other features included a piece of the glacier breaking off and the weight of that ice pushing down on the earth, and when the ice melted, these little wet kettles, small kettle lakes formed. And there are quite a few of those at Freeman Kane too, in the woodlands. So we've got a lot of mesic or really wet woodlands that are just packed with wildflowers at this time of year, and a lot of trails through them. And as a result of all that woodland and water, we also have a lot of wildlife. This year, you know, we're talking mainly about flowers. We could talk about any member of the animal kingdom in these preserves too. This has been a great year for birders. There's just, I think as we're out less in the world, the animals are out more. And there's just been a lot of spottings of migratory birds, especially warblers in the area, including this guy, the Cape May warbler that I spotted at Freeman Kane. Going a little further south, if I had to choose one forest preserve on the river for you to visit and see, you know, just the plenitude of ephemeral wildflowers, it would be Tecumseh Woods in St. Charles. Not one of our biggest preserves, just 110 acres in a real unique location on the Fox River where the water doesn't flow from north to south, but from east to west. That bend in the Fox, and there's 5 islands there. So it's just an interesting place to hike along the river, and a lot of woodland there. So just a carpet of wildflowers early in March, April, and now. So I'd really encourage you to get out there in the next couple of weeks because you'll see some lovely sights. It's split into 2 sections too. On the east side, there's a portion that we run in conjunction with the St. Charles Park District called Riverbend Park, and then the main part of Tecumseh is on the west. 2.5 miles of trail, a little bit of is accessible. The features there, it really includes some deep woodlands. So this is one of our more forested areas. So it's pretty much a successional maple forest, just tons of maples, deep shade, and a lot of ravines. This is a bridge over the ravine. Some of you might remember we had a nature center here at one point, and you had to cross the bridge to get to the nature center. Well, the bridge is still there and the trails are still there, but the nature center is gone. Since the preserve is on the river, you can hike along the river as well, and there's a lot of wildflowers along those trails. You can even cross the bridge into the preserve on the other side of the river, which is John Doerr, and add another about 6 miles to your hike. So you can really do a lot of hiking here between these 2 preserves. There's also just a little interesting natural history there at Tecumseh Woods. A lot of people want to know why, what's the name? What is it named for? Most of our preserves are named after a past commissioner or someone who worked at the forest preserve, but not this one. Kateri Tecumseh was a saint, Catholic saint. The history of this preserve is that there's a lot of history actually, but going farthest back, the land was purchased by Father McGuire, who was based in Chicago, and then on his death, he gave the property to the Sisters of Mercy, an order of nuns that used it as a retreat and a meditation center. They sold the property to the Forest Preserve in the early 90s, I think it was 1992, but they requested that it be named after this saint, Kateri Tecumseh, because they really honored her. She was not from the area, she was from New York, but she converted to Catholicism at the age of 19 after surviving smallpox, and you know, to become a saint, you have to do some pretty good deeds. So she was just highly respected by that order. And the Forest Preserve granted her wish, and that is still the name of the Forest Preserve. Now, in more recent times, There's been some other interesting activity close to Tekakwitha. It's just right upriver of what used to be the Hideaway Lounge and Steakhouse. Some of you might remember. It was the reported hideout and speakeasy that Al Capone, visited frequently when he was coming down to this area as a country escape from Chicago. So history as well as wildflowers. Moving further south, this is Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve, right kind of in the middle of the county. This is where our nature center is. It's about 450 acres, a lot of trail here. Just a mile of it is accessible. It's the paved portion of the Great Western Trail and the Randall Road Trail that kind of connect there. But a lot of mown trail and hikes through woodland, prairie, and wetland. So things you'll see at Leroy Oaks, besides the wildflowers, include, there's a portion that runs along Fearson Creek. So the confluence with the Fox is about 2 miles downstream on Fearson Creek. There's also a man-made pond right outside the nature center where you can see not just flowers, but frogs, northern water snakes. It's a haven for odonates, dragonflies, and damselflies. Very pretty. Some roll to the land here too, and a lot of prairie. So this is prairie on the north side of the preserve. On the south side, on the other side of Dean Street, is the trailhead for the Great Western Forest Preserve and 2 very high quality prairies. The Horlock Prairie that was maintained and restored by high school students from St. Charles High School. And then a remnant prairie called the Murray Prairie that has never been plowed, and it has Illinois Nature Preserve status, which is the highest level of protection we get in this state because it is so high quality. And there's a lot of cultural attractions in Leroy Oaks too. This is our nature center, Creek Bend, where you can look at exhibits on woodlands and wetlands and prairie. And there's a couple of other structures too that you can visit. There are some historical barns. On the bottom right is the Durant House Museum. It's a period house from the 1840s that you can tour. And then on the left is the Pioneer Shoals School that is the pioneer school from the 1870s. Moving farther down, we're nearly done here, is Elburn Forest Preserve. So Elburn is one of the first 4 preserves of the Kane County system, along with Bliss Woods, Johnson's Mound, and Tyler Creek. So that means that a lot of the woodland has been around for a while, and there's a lot of very mature trees, which means that there's also a lot of wildflowers because of that great ecology. There's also been a lot of restoration work done at Elburn Forest Preserve. So not a huge number of miles to hike, but you're gonna see just very old growth, well, not completely old growth, but old oaks and hickories mainly, and a profusion of wildflowers under those, and just beautiful woodlands. It's also the home of the Fox Valley Wildlife Center that you can stop in for a tour. It's a private center, but it's located on our property and we support them. And since there are so many oak trees there, this is our Southern Fine Squirrel Preserve. A lot of these guys have been spotted at the preserve. They nest in hollows. They really like hollows of oak trees, and they eat acorns and cache them for the winter. So they're great to see. You don't often see them because they're nocturnal and very reclusive, but they're adorable. Johnson's Mound Forest Preserve. This is another example of that geological feature that I mentioned called the Kane. So it's not the highest point in Kane County. That's in Plato Center, a bit north, but it rises about 200 feet over the surrounding area. It's large and it keeps getting larger. It's almost 1,000 acres, and it's got trail as well as a road. You don't even have to hike here. You can drive up to the top of the mound if you choose and see the wildflowers via car. The features of Johnson's Mound, this is a picture of the Kane. You can kind of see that rise in elevation towards the back with a whole field of May apples in the front. Another field of what looks like wild geranium in the inland trail here. There's one that goes through the woods. And just in this one picture alone, you can see there's just a lot of variety, a lot of biodiversity at Johnson's Mound. In this picture alone, you can see mayapple, wild leek towards the bottom right, In the back, I see some bloodroot. This is typical, and this show is going on right now. There's also some great structures, stone structures constructed by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, some stonework at the top of the hill, which is a sledding hill, and a beautiful shelter up there too. Two more, Dick Young Forest Preserve. This is our largest preserve. It's in Batavia, a lot of trail miles here. The real highlight of the preserve is the marsh. So Dick Young Forest Preserve is the home of Nelson Lake Marsh. And this is another glacial lake. It's not man-made, and it's pretty big. It is a home to a lot of wildlife, including, it's a great birding location again. And the trail that goes around Nelson Lake goes through woodlands with some great bur oak and some savanna areas as well. So a lot of wildflowers and a lot of wildlife here. Also a lot of restored prairie. If you want to go back later in the year, this is one of our largest restored prairie areas with beautiful diversity of prairie plants in August and September. And because of the marsh, there are a lot of birds that come through, but probably the most famous that you see and advertised in the paper as it migrates through twice a year is the American white pelican. A big bird, very impressive. The one on the right is breeding, and they get that bump on the nose when they're in breeding season. And this is the last one, Bliss Woods Forest Preserve in Sugar Grove, another one of our original 4 preserves. A lot of restoration work goes on in this preserve. It has Illinois Nature Preserve status also, a little over 200 miles of trail. Features that you'll see here, a long, clear eye shot through the woodland because we do prescribed burns here and a lot of restoration work, and it's just super high quality. So you do see that huge variety of wildflowers when you're hiking through, starting in March and going on now. It's hard to see, you know, this was taken a couple of weeks ago before a lot of things were flowering, but all of that greenery that you see are some of those ephemerals that I talked about earlier. It's also got a portion of Blackberry Creek flowing through it, and it has that Illinois Nature Preserve Commission status. A long portion of the Virgil Gilman Trail runs through Bliss Woods, so you can ride all the way from Waubonsee College to Montgomery on that trail going through Bliss Woods. It's lovely. If you're out on the trails, you can take your animals. You might have to social distance from people, but not from animals at this point. So about 12 of our preserves have equestrian trails. You can go out on horses. And in all the preserves, you can have a dog on a leash. And we even have 4 preserves that have dog parks, like off-leash areas. So you can get out with your best friend. You can fish. We have 5 lakes that you can fish in, and you can fish along the preserves on the Fox River. If you're 16 and above, you need a fishing permit. And I mentioned that we have this great interconnected trail system. 3 that we feature, the River Bend Trail goes through John Doerr Forest Preserve. The Great Western Trail runs all the way from Leroy Oaks Forest Preserve west to Sycamore. And that Virgil Gilman Trail that goes through Bliss Woods is a 22-mile out and back from Waubonsee to Montgomery. All pass through woodlands and are great for viewing wildflowers by bike or by hiking if you choose to. And lastly, the trails that we have in the preserves aren't just on land. You can get out on the water trail, and kayak or canoe. I lead a series of kayaking programs in the summer on the Fox River, but you can certainly get out there on your own. We have 3 lakes that you can kayak, and we've got 5 preserves along the river that have canoe and kayak launches on them. And it's really interesting that Kane County is working with the National Park Service to convert the Fox River to the status of National Scenic Waterway, which is part of the National Park System. So that's a really exciting plan that's in place and nearly is coming to fruition. So that tells you that the kayaking on the Fox is a beautiful experience, or it wouldn't qualify for that level of national park status. So I just want to close with encouraging you, when you do get out there to hike in those preserves I mentioned or any others looking for spring wildflowers or anything else, Pick a child with you, pick a kid with you. One of my favorite authors is Rachel Carson, and she talks about how every child needs one adult to help them rediscover the joy and excitement of being out in the natural world, and maintaining that sense of wonder. And I think you can see that in these kids that we've had at some of our programs. It's just wonderful to get out and share it with a child as well as enjoy it yourself. And I hope that at this time, kind of this crazy time, that you all maintain that sense of wonder and get out there and enjoy our preserves. You can even do it with your friends as of today, in groups of under 10, and keep them safe. But that's all I've got. I'm going to shift now to, I'll stop sharing my screen and address any questions that you might have. Get out of here. All right, so looking at the Q&A here, seeing if we have any. Someone says that Bliss Woods has a great variety of trees, which is true. A lot of shagbark hickory and oak. It has the largest shagbark hickory in the county is at Bliss Woods. So let's see, have any other questions? Someone says, I was able to find all of these flowers plus more, but I could not find the Dutchman's breeches. Any suggestions where I can look next? Well, you can come to my backyard. I've got a couple. Tekawitha Woods, it has some sections near where, if you know where the old nature center was, there are some clumps there. I think that's probably the best spot that I'd recommend, Tekawitha Woods for Dutchman's breeches. With all the recent rains, which trails are in the best shape? Well, if you don't want to get your feet muddy, the trails that are limestone or paved would be the best. So, the preserves that I mentioned that have paved trails through them, Bliss Woods is a great example. The paved trail there is, it's on an old rail bed, so it's raised above the ground, the surrounding ground on a plateau, almost looks like an esker. So you're not gonna, the trail's in great condition, and it's a wonderful place to hike, and it's full of wildflowers. So I think I'd probably suggest that one. Just stay away from the ones that are particularly bad. If they're closed, if the trails are closed and flooded, they'll be posted on our website, so you can check there before heading out for a hike. But yeah, if you don't want to get wet and muddy, stick to those screened or paved trails. I went to Big Rock Library. Few copies of the bicycle map for our patrons. Yes, stop over at Creek Bend Nature Center. We have a whole bunch of them. We'll be open starting on Monday from 10 to 4, Monday through Thursday, noon to 4, Saturday and Sunday. Or you could also go to the Kane County Government Center. They print those and have them there. Any suggestions on the best preserve to see pileated woodpeckers or pileated? It's always a, they have been spotted in a couple of preserves. I have personally not seen the pileated, but seen the evidence of them with the rectangular drill holes at Johnson's Mount. I suggest looking there. Okay. I'm surprised by the variety of flowers at Fabian, east of Route 25. Dutchman's breeches at Dick Young as well, someone reports. Okay, good to know. And another one at Leroy Oaks along the creek. Okay. The wildflowers have been stunning this year. It's been a really great year for them, yeah. Okay, oh, here we go. Saw the pileated at Bliss Woods this year. So there's another place for you to look. I think a likely habitat for them is that place that I mentioned that was the Flying Squirrel Preserve, Elburn, just because there are a lot of old snags there and old trees. So that's the type of a habitat that they like. All right. Well, oh, we got one last one. I'm gonna report this, and then I'm gonna let you get out and do your own hiking. We heard the pileate at Hannaford, but didn't see it. Okay. Well, if you do see a pileate, let me know. I'm always curious to see where people are seeing those. They're making a comeback. They're relatively rare. For those of you that don't know, pileated, we have 8 woodpeckers in Kane County, and the pileated are our largest. The smallest one is the downy. But the most rare is the pileated. You don't see it very often. They really, they prefer savanna habitats, and you know, those are rare and among themselves. All right, well, thank you for joining me, everybody, on the webinar. I look forward to seeing you in real life very soon. Hope you're all doing well. Bye now.